Welcome, folks, again. So we have an interesting topic today, how to transform your organization in 2023 with OKRs, right? We are at an inflection point today as we are heading into 2023, right? From an era where growth at any cost, right, to a transformation of better unit economics and better execution. Companies are looking to transform themselves to execute better in 2023, right, with better focus and alignment. So just one quick housekeeping for folks. Please type your questions throughout the session in the chat, and we will respond to the questions either on the chat itself or towards the end of the session. Our presenter, John, will respond to your questions. Right? But we really encourage you to start typing your questions in the Q&A section. Right? So let me quickly do the introduction. Yeah, next. So we have with us John. John is a very experienced transformation consultant. He has led over 50 transformation projects. He's ex-McKinsey. He has joined us from Austin, Texas. He's also a Stanford alumni. He's a published author. We are very happy to have him here, and he's going to share, his enormous experience in transformation projects and implementing OKRs across a wide variety of organizations today. Right? My name is Senthil. I'm President and COO for Profit.co. I lead customer success and coaching for Profit.co. Right? Yeah. Next, we'll start with probably a quick introduction to Profit.co. Right? So Profit.co is a Silicon Valley SaaS startup. We help companies execute their strategy and improve performances of teams using the OKR framework. We are rated among the top 5 in the industry, by customer reviews in G2, Capterra, and other platforms. We have already been mentioned by Gartner in a few reports. And we have one of the most expansive product portfolio, which stretches from strategy to OKRs to tasks and business performance and to employee development and employee engagement in employee performance. With that, let me hand over to John to take this further.
Awesome. Thank you, Senthil. So everybody, before we jump into the fun part here, we'll give a little bit of background on Redwood. Quite frankly, just to give myself a little bit so you guys kind of know where I'm coming from. This is a little bit about the type of work that we do, and you can kind of see, obviously, most of what we do is on the strategy, growth strategy and transformation type work. We also have a lot of experience doing strategy execution and support, which is very akin to the transformational programs, product strategy, M&A, and then some sales and marketing excellence. So this is just to give you a little bit of a background in terms of the type of work that I've done and the experience I'll be speaking from today. And similar to Senthil, just want to give you guys a little bit of a background. We have a lot of depth. Our leading industries are B2B SaaS, tech services, and distribution, but we obviously serve clients across a number of different industries, typically with growth strategy, strategic planning, operating planning type projects. So that's just a little bit about us. So now for the fun part. What we want to do today is we're going to talk about, like Senthil kind of kicked us off, we're going to be talking about transformation. And I come at this from a slightly different perspective, obviously. We typically get hired to deliver strategies and then ultimately transformations. And OKRs are sort of a powerful tool to do that. And there's a little bit more to the story. So today, what we want to do is kind of give you a little bit of a sense of when you take this transformational lens, how do you deliver a successful transformation? Like Senthil was saying, as we move from a growth at all costs to something where we're thinking a little bit more about what our margin profile looks like and profitability. Maybe the transformation for the next 2 to 3 years needs to be along those lines, or maybe it's continuing to drive as much growth as you possibly can. Transformation is agnostic to what your objective is. It's just a way of thinking about, how do I transform my business? How do I make a step change improvement in what we're trying to do? So what we want to do today is we're going to spend about 30 to 40 minutes giving you guys some really helpful information, some practical tools and concepts that you can use after the webinar. And then at the end, I want to make sure we reserve at least 15 to 20 minutes to have conversation and discussion. So like Senthil was saying, we really encourage you all to put your questions in the chat. We'd like this to be somewhat conversational for sure. So chat or Q&A, please do drop in, if there's something you want to talk more about, if you have a specific question that's related to your enterprise in particular, let's talk about it. We can get as tactical as we have time for, but about 15 to 20 minutes at the end, and we will try to end on time. So the agenda for today, what we want to talk about is I want to share with you 3 very simple key factors that drive transformational change. We'll talk about that. So what do you have to do to be successful in driving transformation? And this is it. I'm going to keep this at a 4th grade level because I'm old enough now to know that that's the best level to actually be successful. Let's not make this complicated. So what's the kind of very simple factors, easy to explain, hard to do, as I'm sure a lot of the folks listening know. The next thing we want to do is one of the factors is thinking big. And so we want to walk with you guys through what we call a strategic planning 1-pager, which is to drive transformation. You have to have some sort of strategy. You have to know where you're trying to go to do transformation to where. And so we'll walk you guys through a 1-page document that kind of gives you a little bit of a sense of how do you do this? Again, trying to give you guys some helpful tools in the time that we have. Then another key factor is actually execution. So executing transformation. What are the OKR best practices that help drive transformation? And I've seen this both effective and successful and not. And so Senthil and I will walk you through a little bit of how do you use OKRs to deliver transformation. So once we know what the transformation is you want to deliver, how do you use OKRs to actually do it? And we're going to give you guys some really helpful tools and tricks and tips that I have learned, that Senthil and the Profit.co team have learned. So again, you guys will have a lot of helpful information. And at the end, we want to do a live exercise. So we'll actually have you guys start to do one component of this to make this really practical, and then we'll jump into questions. So obviously a lot that we want to do. And I think it's going to be a very substantive conversation. So let me start with a simple page. People have spent decades researching how do you deliver transformations. You can go back to Peter Drucker in the 1950s. This is not a new question, but I think that we've started to get more clear on what the answer is. The best, and I live and breathe this stuff, by the way. So, I'm basically boiling down many books and research projects and all that kind of stuff into 1 page. I think this is the best 1-page description of what drives transformation successfully that I've run into in my career. So the backstory on this is that Sandy Ogg was an operating partner at Blackstone, a very senior operating partner at Blackstone, and which is a private equity firm, a mega cap kind of private equity firm in the United States. And Sandy is, well known for value creation planning and execution. I've actually worked with Sandy on one project and had him in the room kind of walk us through the findings of the research I'm talking to you about. But Blackstone basically said, hey, look, why don't you take some time and research, all of our portfolio companies. We've had some big winners and we've had some losers. What's the difference? And so Sandy did this really, really interesting research project, figuring out who the winners were, the losers were, and then really looking at the executive team and their behaviors and saying, what's the difference? And he found these 3 really, really important, very simple to articulate, hard to do factors. The first is thinking big. You brainstorming big ideas for your company's vision and aspirations. So these are your long-term goals and plan, mission, purpose, culture. Thinking big, it's almost like the envelope for what's possible. So some teams were very thinking sort of small, like here's what we do today. Next year, we should do what we're doing today, but 10% more of it, right? So very incremental. There's nothing wrong with that. You're just not going to drive transformation, right? It's harder to double or triple or quadruple your business if that's the way you're thinking. So the first key factor is thinking big. The next 2 key factors, which are much more in the execution piece, which is OKRs really become part of, is starting small and acting fast. It's very, very interesting. So starting small there were teams that would say, hey, we want to make these huge changes and we need to start by working on the huge change, versus starting small, which is what can we actually go make progress on this week, this month, this quarter to build operational momentum. And so Sandy really recommends starting pretty darn small. Inversely related to that, act fast. So going back to velocity equals mass, right, times acceleration. If you bring what you're trying to do down, you can actually accelerate faster. It's kind of an analogy to physics. So you want to act really fast. You don't want to do as much stuff, but you want them to really freaking move. And that kind of gets you into the ODA loop. And you can kind of look that up online if people are interested in that, but it's sort of another conceptual frame to understand why this works, which is it's better to observe, orient, decide, act, and then get into a quick feedback loop. You want to be iterating really quickly. It's sort of an agile approach to transformation. So I'm going to spend the most time on this page, but 3 really helpful factors to do this. The left side, thinking big, strategy, vision, culture. Starting small, acting fast, that's execution. And that's where OKRs come in. So let's start. We were invited to work, obviously, to do this webinar with you all because we kind of span this, but we particularly focus on this left side, thinking really big. So how do you do that? Obviously, strategic projects can take a lot of time. I'm sure a lot of folks on the phone, you guys have done these types of exercises before. You can really get into a lot of depth. So what I wanted to do is I want to give you all a very simple one-page framework that I think does a pretty nice job of articulating what a strategy looks like. There are 3 questions that you should answer. One is, what is your winning aspiration? And if you look out 3 to 5 years, and we can, there's the reason I'm saying 3. 1 tends to be a little too myopic. You tend to just, hey, look, I just want to do more of what I'm doing. So think a little further out, 3 years, 5 years. What does success look like? That's kind of your objective. Second question is, where do you want to play? Defining clearly geographies, product categories, consumer segments, channels, stages of production. Not only where you want to play, but where you don't. And then the third question is, how are you going to win? So you've decided what you want to accomplish. You've decided where you want to play. And then how are you going to actually win? And kind of thinking through, what's our core value proposition? What's our competitive edge? Why are we going to win versus somebody else? And for each of them, it's about 3 to 5 sort of sentences to kind of sum it up. So again, this is kind of strategy on a page, right? Obviously, typically when we do projects, it's more, there's a little more going on, right? We do this in a more robust way, but I wanted to give you guys something simple. So if you're at your company, here's the question to ask yourself. Can you answer these questions? If you're on the leadership team of your company, can you answer these questions? Do you think your team has an answer? And if the answer is no, then you probably need some more strategic clarity, and you're probably going to have some limits in terms of your ability to think big. Okay. And so you immediately know. If you can look at these questions and say, do I know what our winning aspiration is? Are we aligned? And if the answer is no, then there's some work to do. So let me just to make this a little bit concrete, what does this look like? So again, each answer is different, but I wanted to kind of give you some examples. So let's just take the winning aspiration, for example. I want to make this really concrete. Core elements we tend to see with our clients: financial, impact, services, scalability. So for example, on the right-hand side, grow organic revenue by 20% and EBITDA by 30% within the next 18 months. Could be an example. Impact, increase the total customer served by organization by 50% in the next 36 months with industry-leading service. These are just sort of examples, again, of what you might see in a winning aspiration. And that's basically the winning aspiration. What you want to have true is when you read it, if nothing else was to occur, if you got those results, you would say we were successful. That is the key psychological test. Is the executive team needs to look around and say, if we pull this off and nothing else is true in the world, But if this is true, would we say we were successful? And if we eliminated any of them, we wouldn't feel that way. You want to kind of get the minimum number, the minimum number of elements that get you to the answer. So these are sort of some examples of winning aspirations. So now you want to have that in place. I will say, and I don't, I'd be interesting to, and Senthil and I've been just talked about this in the past. If you're deploying OKRs outside the context of a strategy, right? OKRs are very much of they're a powerful tool, but it's like if you're remodeling your house and you don't know what you want it to look like, right? Sometimes powerful tools can sort of lead you the wrong direction. So you want to have a good strategy, but a good strategy is definitely not enough. And that's where OKRs become really, really critical. So let's assume you have OKRs. Now we want to talk about starting small, acting fast. This is about execution. This is where OKRs are really, really, really helpful. And we're going to talk a little bit about, we're going to jump into this now. So I don't think a lot of people on this call need this, but I want to give a quick primer in case. What do we even mean by OKR? Because sometimes we jump right in and we never actually define them. So the O in the KR, and you can see, by the way, we get OKR, it's objective key result. That's where that comes from. The objective is sort of a high level qualitative objective tied to your company's overall strategy. So an example might be become the biggest B2B SaaS provider in our product category by revenue in North America. That's a little bit, you can kind of see where that's going mathematically. You could sort of argue that might be a little too precise, but it's not pinned down. But you get the O. Then your key result is something very quantitative. It should be falsifiable, right? Meaning we should be able to know whether this is true or not later. So it could be a milestone, like yes or no. It could be a number, and we need to be at this number or greater. So for example, grow revenue from 30 million, 30%, 39 million in the next fiscal year would be an example of a key result. One key tip for tying OKRs to strategy is use one objective and 1 to 3 KRs for each winning aspiration. So one thing that we'll work on with clients is, hey, I've got my winning aspiration, now what? And this is where OKRs are super powerful. It's like, okay, for the next year, look at what your winning aspiration is for the next 3 to 5 years, pick an objective that supports your overall winning aspiration, and then have 1 to 3 KRs for each. That's how you create a clear link between your strategy and then your OKR system. So what are some kind of key principles? These are things that I have seen work really well, and I've seen the inverse of them work really poorly. So meaning if you don't do these, it can also, I've seen it kind of not work out well. So the first is selecting and focusing your top strategic priorities. And Senthil and I have talked about this before. You know, one thing you see a lot of, which I think is not helpful, is the metastasization of OKRs. Like you can really overdo OKRs. I mean, I've been in organizations where I'm like, I don't even know. It took us 3 weeks to figure out how many OKRs they had. They had like 60 KRs being tracked to the company. That can be the right answer. I don't want to make a specific rule, but I really subscribe to the less is more school of thought. Get the right ones and really, really focus, right? Because you go back to transformation, we said start small, act fast. Starting small means you also need to not have 100 things. Like pick your spots, right? Pick your spots supported by your strategy. So select and focus on your top priorities. And I'm always telling my clients less. The boat will move faster the less stuff's on it, okay? The next thing is you want to have a budget, target, and stretch goals for your top OKRs, okay? This is a lot of companies that we work with, it's fine to just say, here's our objective, here's our key result, and we just have one number. We want to grow our sales 30%. Okay, great. That's the key result. It can be helpful to say, here's the variable we're looking at, sales, our budget goal, which we're reporting to our investors. We're reporting, some of my clients will have different numbers. This is the stuff we would report to public markets, right? This is the number that finance is using, is a budget goal, okay? that's one where you're like, we want to be at an 80% confidence interval. It's kind of the way that I think about it. Like you're going to be surprised if you don't hit it. The target goal is, hey, this is what we want to hit. It's a jump ball. Call it a 50% probability. It's like we want to stretch ourselves, but it's not guaranteed, right? It's a target goal. And the last one would be sort of a stretch goal, which would be maybe it's a 20% probability, but it's like, it's not 5, it's not conceived very low probability. It's feasible, but it's a real stretch. And so you can say for sales, you might say, look, our budget's 15, our target's 25, our stretch is 30, right? Maybe we can get to 30. We're not going to beat ourselves up if we don't get there. We're not going to get upset about it. We're going to stay in a positive mindset, but let's at least throw out the possibility that we might hit it. So I think that's where stretch. What I love with stretch goals, when you have a stretch goal, is asking yourself, what would have to be true to hit it? I often find that that's the most valuable thing that comes out, because you say, okay, we want to get to 30, 35%. How would we even do that? What would have to be true, right? And it kind of makes you think, oh, well, we'd have to like go into a new product category, or we'd have to get our marketing to actually start working, right? And that creates possibility. So that's why the stretch goal can be so helpful. So don't neglect the stretch goal. The last thing, and I know Cynthia and I've had, and I know having been on some OKR, some Profit.co webinars in the past, I know this has been discussed before, but it bears repeating, which is decoupling your performance management from OKRs. Because if you have never done this before, let me tell you, people love to do that. And I suppose someone can make an argument for it, but I really think, and I know Cynthia feels strongly about this, there's a value to decoupling those, because if you want people to have candid conversations, if you want people to be ambitious in their goal setting, if you link it to their performance review, you create an incentive for them to lower the bar. I mean, it's just human nature, right? It's like, wait, I'm going to get a bonus, or I'm going to get a good rating if I hit this number. I don't want that number to be too high. We see this obviously in sales. It's called sandbagging. So basically, you're taking the sandbagging behavior and having it through your whole company. So in general, I like when people keep those systems separate, right? There might be some relationship. It doesn't need to be like, you can't touch it at all, but you don't want to use the OKR as like the only component of the performance review. So just some key tips that I've seen that I think are worth keeping in mind. So some other challenges that we have seen. We want to kind of share this with you all again, and this is really based on a lot of Profit.co experience. What are some challenges that need to be successfully addressed to successfully deploy? Cynthia, do you want to speak to this a little bit?
Sure. So, based on our experiences, we have found that one of the top challenges, right, for your OKR program to be successful, particularly if you are using OKR as a transformation initiative, is getting the executive commitment, right? And it should come out very clearly, who's the executive sponsor for the OKR program, right? That should be pretty clear. They should articulate the goals of the program pretty clearly at the beginning of the program. They should publicly support the program. They should constantly communicate throughout every phase of the program. They need to conduct reviews and provide feedback for people based on the OKRs, right? So the executive commitment comes out in multiple ways, right? That's number one. And number two, employee adoption. Employee adoption is, again, very, very important. A lot of people get excited about the planning aspect of OKRs, but the real challenge really comes in doing week after week, right? Putting the nose on the grind and checking in regularly, and making sure your employees are doing that quite regularly, to keep them motivated to do that, and keep them engaged in the process, right? That's quite a challenge. And there may be resistance to change, and particularly if there have been a history of a lot of programs going on, and people might think that there's another flavor of the month type of an initiative, right? So we find progressive organizations deploying a lot of strong employee engagement initiatives, right, to encourage adoption. And of course, there's a specific expertise required for running an OKR program. How do you define a quarterly calendar? How do you define high quality OKRs, outcome versus output? How do you do alignment, right? How do you create a learning organization? All of these are, OKR expertise, which you may want to take the help of, consulting organization like John Nance, right? That's pretty important. And finally, the management bandwidth that is required for running an OKR program. And if you plan and execute well, you should still be able to do it well, but there are clearly defined roles for running an OKR program. And there is definitely, you should budget for some management bandwidth for running the OKR program.
Great, thanks.
Thanks, John.
Great. Okay. So one thing that we wanted to talk about too is we want to be realistic. And I know this is based on Profit.co experience. I think this is also quite frankly supported by our experiences in organizations that are using Profit.co, and we're trying to do this with more traditional kind of Excel-based means or what have you. How much time does it take, right, to do this well? Going back to the page that Senthil was just talking through, there's a lot to do this well. I mean, I think one thing that I commonly see is people think that this is going to be really easy. There's not, like, people don't think through, well, I got to go get the data. I have to update the data. I have to have, ideally, you're having conversations around performance intra-year so that if things aren't on track, you can make changes. I mean, if you're not doing that, it's not that helpful. So how much time does it take? So OKR chief, 30 to 50% of their time. You want someone internally saying, hey, look, I am the OKR chief. I am running the enterprise-wide time. Smaller companies, obviously it's less, but this is sort of for a typical kind of somewhat at scale company. Executive sponsor, whoever that may be, maybe it's a CEO, maybe it's someone in the C-suite, about 5% of their time. They're probably having at least one meeting a week on this. Maybe they don't do a week, but then they might have a 3 or 4 hour meeting, every month or two to kind of get an update and make sure that things are on track. People aren't going to be putting in their information. There's all these things that are going to go wrong, and you'll need their engagement. There's typically an executive assistant kind of helping coordinate all the different components of this. And then the one thing is the OKR champions. Senthil, do you want to, I know we had a really interesting conversation about this particular role. Would you mind kind of sharing your experience on this one?
Yeah, so we do see enterprise customers where, they implement it, across multiple departments, the numbers crossing, 500, several thousands, right? And when that happens, the span of control for an OKR chief, the influence that that person is going to have, it's going to be fairly limited, right? So you want to really have, OKR champions who are department level folks. They may not be department leaders, but they're probably 2 to 3 levels below the department leaders. These are very enthusiastic folks, upcoming folks who have a lot of expertise in OKRs, very enthusiastic, ready to share their knowledge, and they have a very good equation across the board. So they are the go-to person, right, when it comes for people when they want to learn about OKRs, learn about the tool. So having and cultivating very good OKR champions across different departments, that can really make the difference between huge success and a so-so type of a program, right? We are seeing that across multiple implementations.
Great.
Thanks.
Great. Okay. So let's pull all this together. So one thing that we wanted to give you all, there's a lot that we've talked about. We talked about the 3 factors of transformation. We've provided a strategic 1-page overview. We've talked about how OKRs link to strategy, and we've done this, by the way, in about 20, 25 minutes. So I imagine there's a lot of information to be taking in and actually processing. And I know we've got some good questions, so we'll hit. One thing I want to do is I want to quickly walk you guys through a globally obviously globally known and recognized company. How does this all play out? And this is actually based, Disney has not been a client of ours, so I just want to be super transparent. This is not based on actual project experience, although we'd certainly be happy to work with them. But we want to but this is pretty close if you read their documentation, kind of how this works. So I'm going to quickly walk you through how does strategy and even some of the longer term stuff like purpose and vision translate into OKR. So let me give you guys a quick example. Let's talk about Disney. The purpose of Disney, by the way, this is actually true. So this is, by the way, the data here, the numbers we're not going to use actuals, but a lot of this stuff is actually pretty accurate. Is to bring happiness into people's lives. So the interesting thing about purpose, and I won't let myself get too far down a digression here, is purposes you want them to be timeless. They're actually even older aged than your strategy. Your strategies tend to have a time stamp on them. A really great purpose doesn't. And I think Disney's done a fantastic job with this. I don't know how long they've been using this, but it's fantastic, right? This was true in the 1930s when they started. It's still true today. And from my experience, they do a really great job at it. We're trying to bring happiness into your life. Theme parks, movies, cruise ships. Like, you think about cruise ships. Why is Disney in the cruise ship business? Who had the crazy idea at Disney to get into the cruise ship business? You go back to their purpose statement and you're like, we can bring happiness to people's lives through cruises, right? It's really amazing how much of their business model maps back to these 6 words. Incredible, right? That's how powerful this type of stuff can be. It actually makes you very creative and generative. So we start with purpose. Then we say, what's the vision? This is a little more of like, vision typically is like, let's be more specific. What are we trying to be at a certain point in time? We want to be the world's leading producer and provider of entertainment and information. So what's the growth strategy? Entertain, inform, and inspire people around the globe with world-class entertainment properties, movies and content, cruises, and digital properties, right? This is what they're trying to do. I'm stripping out the numbers because I don't want to get us lost in the numbers, but we're kind of specking out the key components. And then, so what would our 3-year goal be? We want to expand our global footprint with new entertainment properties, expanded digital assets, and an even better customer experience. Again, this is more of illustrative. We're kind of speculating what it could be. So that's kind of at a high level, on a half of a PowerPoint page, Disney's sort of strategy and purpose. So now the executive team at Disney is saying, how do I actually execute on this? And they decided to deploy OKRs, okay? Which is a really good move because they want to make this tactical and specific. How do we actually make this happen? So here are some 3 examples. So objective number 1, we want to grow our global business. Disney has been, obviously, was started in the United States. It moved to Europe, I believe, in the 60s and 70s, but it's very global, and it's trying to become increasingly global, right? And I'm sure if you look at their forward projections, it's a lot in China, it's a lot in India, it's basically in APAC. So we want to increase our non-core market global sales by 7%. So they're saying that's a very clear result. Our global sales are $1 billion. We want to be at $1.07 billion, $140 million, right? We 7% year-on-year growth, X our core markets, which for them is North America and Europe. Their next objective is we want to delight our customers, because go back to their purpose, right? So it's like, if we might be making money, but are we delighting our company? Because that's our purpose. So we want to improve our net promoter score by 10%, right? When you come to a Disney property, a cruise, right? And actually Disney does use NPS in some of their properties. Would you recommend it to a friend or family member, right? That's a very simple way to say, are you happy? Last one is we want to build a great corporate culture. Again, typically these are a little more financial, but we just want to kind of, make this interesting for everybody. So how would you do that? We want to achieve a weekly employee satisfaction of 8+. Now, I will tell you, Disney actually does prioritize employees because employees are such an important part of the experience, that actually having happy employees is an important part of their business model. So this isn't too far-fetched, but probably is a little less financial than it might be in reality. But these are some examples of, here's the strategy, this purpose, vision, strategy, goals, and then these are specific OKRs that we might want to drive, for this coming year. So that's a little bit of an example. I want to flip to, we're going to go into Q&A, and then we're also going to but we're going to start really quickly. We've got some good questions. So we've got those. But I also want to do a quick live activity. So this is optional, but encouraged. But very quickly, to kind of show you how all this, because sometimes doing a practical exercise really pulls things together. So what I'd love is, regardless of what role you have in your company, it doesn't matter. You don't need to be the CEO of your company to do this. Articulate a rough winning aspiration for companies. If you think out 3 years from now, what's at least one point that you think would be included in your company's winning aspiration? Like, what does success look like in 3 years? So for example, Let's say you're at a high growth, high potential business services company, and you're at $30 million of revenue. 3 years from now, you might say, and you've been building this for 12 years, let's say. In 3 years, you might want to be $50 million of revenue. You'd say, you know what? That's a pretty good growth rate. And so that's kind of, it's around 20%. And we want to achieve that for the next 3 years. So that's one thing of our winning aspiration. Or your winning aspiration might be, we only sell in North America right now, or we only sell in APAC. We want to become a global business where we're having sales in multiple geographies. So take a second, take a minute, and write down your one or more winning aspirations. Then the next thing, this is really interesting, is you want to create 1 to 3 OKRs that would help your company drive progress on one point of your winning aspiration. So write down your winning aspiration, and then make your OKRs that have the time frame be 1 year. Okay, so we're thinking it's December. We're all thinking about 2023. Let's assume you guys are on an annual planning cycle as opposed to some other syncopation. What would your OKR look like? What would an objective look like? And what would a key result look like? So I'll give you guys some examples. So let's say you want to be a global business. Your objective would be to enter our first non-North American market. And the result would be achieve $250,000 plus of sales from a customer based outside North America, right? So it's not a dollar, it needs to be material, because you could say we could just go do a quick demo and get paid, but no, we want to say something like that. It needs to be a material amount of sales. So that could be a key result. So we're going to give you guys 2 minutes to finish this, and then we will jump into, we'll answer some questions. Since I'm thinking maybe we just go through some Q&A. We've got some good questions here. Does that sound good?
Absolutely. Yeah, John.
Okay, great. Yeah, go ahead. Do you want to facilitate through this, or either way?
No, I think, John, you can pick up the questions and start answering. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, great. I'm going to kick a few over to you for sure. So, okay. So there was a good question. I'm just taking it from the top. So honestly, if anyone has a question, by the way, please drop it in. If you're wrestling with something conceptually, like this is a really fun part. And if you're asking it, 20 other people probably have the same question. So don't be shy about asking. So, is there a defining distinctive relation between OKRs and KPIs? So there actually is. When you look at them, they seem really similar, and actually they can overlap. I want to be clear. There's nothing philosophically opposed between the two terms, but a KPI typically is more of just like tracking how something's going. So it would be like, how many leads came in this week, or what was our efficiency of the manufacturing floor, right? So it's like something you're just kind of tracking day to day. It's a key performance indicator. So it's kind of in the name. It's a performance indicator. How are things going? And there might be a lot of them, right? So when I work with clients, typically, we might have 50 KPIs, and I think that's actually fine, right? So because you want people to have data on how things are going. OKRs, objective and key results, you want as few of them as possible, and they should be more strategic. So you wouldn't want like the efficiency of your manufacturing floor or the number of leads you're getting. That's an operational metric. It's not critical to the business. It might be super important for certain of your staff, but it's not necessarily key. So that's kind of the distinction. OKRs tend to be more strategic, at least at the high level, or more at the operating level. I strongly suggest you have less of them. And key KPIs, though, especially if you have a good Tableau instance and you have good data systems, there can be a lot of value in tracking more of it. So that's kind of the difference there. We had a request from Steve. There was a question, Senthil, about a demo of Profit. Would you want to speak to that one, just for folks who are interested?
Sure. Yeah, folks, as part of this session today, we are not planning any demo of the Profit.co platform, but obviously for people who are interested, absolutely, drop a message with your email ID and coordinates. We'll be very happy to arrange a demo for you. at a mutually acceptable time later. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Dominic asked about, he said, hasn't heard of a budget goal for a key result. Could you please share examples? So I will share an example, and I'll share an example that's actually with a client I have right now. So it's a $1 billion plus publicly traded software as a service company. I'm not going to say their name, but it's one many of you are probably familiar with. They use the 3-tiered OKR system that we talked about before. The budget goal is, what are we committing to finance, right? So everyone go back to your company experience thing. Like finance, like, hey, what are you going to hit? What is your budget goal, right? That's what we're going to go report to our investors. That's what we're going to go report to the public markets. So don't give me the stretch version, because we're going to be held accountable to this by external parties. That's budget. So it's the most conservative. It's like, I like to say, I mean, look, if you want to be really analytical about it, what's your 80% confidence? It's like, you don't want to say 95, that's getting a little small, but 4 out of 5 times you're going to hit this, so that, you don't have to explain to people why you didn't do it. Then the target is, you get the team around, whoever that is, and say, what are we actually trying to do this year, guys? Right? I'd like 50-50. Let's say things go relatively well. What's like, there's a half a chance, it's kind of a jump ball. Like, we're going to have to show up and play to hit this goal. It's not just going to happen. That's your target. And then the stretch is, I like to say, about 20%. And I think the value to stretch is making you think what would have to be true. And I have been a part of many conversations where the stretch goal generates outside the box thinking that is very, very helpful. So it's helpful to have, but you don't have to do it. And I do want to say, you don't have to have these. It's just something to keep in mind. So you put in your software, you may not want all 3. You could just pick one, right? Maybe it's just your budget or your target, probably not your stretch, but you can have your stretch somewhere in your guys' records. Okay. So that's that one. Let's see here. And then let's see. We had a question about, how do you decouple? Oh, great. Wow. This one got a lot of thumbs up. If you decouple performance management from OKRs, how do you maintain accountability? So this is really interesting. I don't want to get too far off into social science here, but I am going to give you guys a little bit of a weird analogy, or not a real analogy, but something to think about. So what you want to do is, just because it's not part of performance management doesn't mean you don't have a clear accountable owner. So I want to make that those two things are distinct, actually. Accountability and performance management are separate concepts. And I'm curious, Cynthia, if you agree on this, but I think I do like it. Yes. Okay. I think you want someone to say, is someone who's in charge of this one, who's accountable for this one, right? Or who's responsible. Mm-hmm. Some type of, there's not ambiguity. It's not just whose goal is that? I don't know. That doesn't work. You need someone specific to own it. But it doesn't necessarily have to hit the performance management. Now, the pessimists out there, the realists out there, and I see you, and I am in some ways similar, would say, but if there's no performance management, why would they care? Why would they do it? What I would basically say is, there was a early scientific study in the early 1900s, one of the earliest ones, about observing workers. And what they found is these researchers were going in, it's called the Hawthorne effect, and they were watching workers work. And what they noticed is the researchers would come, and then productivity would go up. And they're like, wow, what's going on here? This is so weird. Why has productivity gone up? And the reason is because just the function of being watched makes people perform. So if my name's against it, I don't need it to be a performance management. The social pressure and my own internal pressure is actually quite substantial. And I think we can all identify with this, right? Like, if you go work out and you're the only one there, right? I can only speak for myself. Sometimes I kind of take it easy on myself. But if I have a bunch of people around me somehow that are all kind of seeing what I'm doing, my performance goes up. So don't discount the value of transparency and clear accountability, even if there's not performance management tied to it. Senthil, did you want to say something on that too?
No, I think those are absolutely great points. And folks, what we have seen in practice is that, the whole idea of OKRs, we encourage people to take at least, part of their goals, part of their OKRs as stretch key results. And, if people don't have to worry about, their performance, tying to their performance of the, specific key results, then they can be definitely a little more creative, a little more bold in terms of taking the risk and taking those stretch key results. But we have seen that, some companies see value in terms of people, who are ready to enthusiastically participate in the OKR process, right? Not exactly the results, but they're participating very enthusiastically, checking in regularly, right? It gives some weightage for that in performance later. And also, once you go through 3 to 4 cycles, right? Once you are done with that and people are comfortable with the whole OKR methodology, maybe after that, give a small, take OKRs as one of the inputs, right? I mean, these are all in practice we are seeing companies do, right? But the recommendation is exactly what John mentioned. Yeah.
Great, thank you. We had a question from Jillian on who should be involved in setting the OKRs. As a best practice, how much should staff be involved? So, it's a good question. I don't think there's like a hard and fast answer to this. Quite frankly, what I generally find is you don't want one person to do it. I have seen some instances where the CEO will just say, here's what the OKRs are, and it's just coming from from on high. I think that is a great way to not get a motivation and buy-in and not get it to a good answer. I've also seen companies try to involve everyone in the company, and it just becomes this massive exercise that takes up way too much time from my perspective. So I generally think I like the executive team, or a subset of the executive team. I think is in general for most companies the best answer. It always depends, but you're going to have your full executive team, or a group that's chaired by someone on the executive team, kind of leading the process and setting them. And then typically you want to go back to the full executive team and make sure that they all, before you finalize them, that both the executive team and potentially their direct reports all see them and have an opportunity to offer feedback, because maybe they know something that the people who authored them don't. And so that's generally the best practice. I think you want to kind of get rid of the extremes. You don't want the 1 to 3 people in a room doing this without any engagement, which I've seen that. I actually don't recommend that. And I have seen companies try to involve everybody, and that's not too that has its own problem. So I think that's kind of what the best practice is. We had someone ask about longer term, like a 3-year vision or 1-year vision. I think this depends on where you are in your growth stage. So if you are looking for product market fit, or you basically have product market fit, but in one vertical, there's a lot of uncertainty. And so generally I recommend you want to pull your visioning exercise in to be a fair amount tighter. So 1 year may actually be totally sufficient. Once you have a well-defined business model and a lot of the dials are clearly in place, and most of our clients fall into that category, the problem with 1 year is you almost always get incremental. It's more of the same. So the way to invite bigger thinking is you need a bigger window. You need 3 to 5 years. So that's kind of how I would recommend it. If you're in an organization that's got some, you've got a working business model, it's been around for a number of years, then I think, the 3 years is a good visioning, and then the OKRs can be at the 1 year. We had a question about top down versus down to top. I think OKRs are made for top down. So I'll just answer that question. I think most of the time, 90% of the cases, I would recommend top down, and then you can do down to top, but I personally probably won't recommend that. Okay, we have a great question from Tom on, I've seen teams adopt OKRs and then put most of their time into short-term tasks. So Tom, this is actually funny, because this could be a whole other conversation about governance, right? How do you govern OKRs? So I'm just reading your question, how you phrased it. My gut here is that you got to have the governance system in place. So once you have the OKRs, that's great. I would say it's necessary, but not sufficient for them to be very helpful for you. And Senthil was kind of talking about this before on the number of roles that need to be involved and the percentage of time. So what you probably, the quickest solve here is you need to have a clear meeting cadence of when are you going to look, when is the team going to look at how you're doing against your OKRs? And it can't be annual. It can't be, we get together, we set OKRs, and then we look at it and say, how do we do, right? That doesn't really work. You need to say monthly business reviews or quarterly business reviews. You know, we do this at our company. And you know, we'll sit down and say, how are we doing, right? We have these goals. How are we doing? And in areas where we're overperforming, why? In areas where we're underperforming, why? And that's where you get the value of OKRs, because it's helping you drive change. And so it's really important that do this. But there is a tendency to get caught up in the minutia. I mean, that's why we have OKRs in the first place, because strategy is not necessarily very, it's not really a natural disposition to think really longer term. So there's a natural disposition to kind of get stuck in the details like you're referring to. So you have to kind of intentionally fight against that, or you kind of get pulled in by the gravity of that dynamic. So that's very common, Tom. There's not anything, you know, nothing wrong with that situation. It's very common, but to the extent you can get out of it, I think that's really good. Okay, cool. We had a question on holding companies. It's a little, I would say you'd want the holding company to be very, very, very simple, and the more complex OKRs would be at the sub level. But the holding company would be like, you know, probably simple financial ones. And then the interesting OKRs are always going to be at the operating level. This is a really interesting question. We have a question from Ethan about connecting company OKRs to department team OKRs, particularly admin functions such as finance, talent, and legal. I know I have a point of view, but Senthil, do you want to, I'm curious what your perspective is on that.
Yeah, so what we have seen is that if you really go back to why companies are using OKRs, right? One, you know, companies want to improve execution, right? They also want to improve employee engagement. And obviously, all these departments that you're referring to, right, we would call them as support departments, right? They are absolutely, you know, we want to make sure that, you know, they are included in the OKR program as well. And we have seen quite a few engagements where they're included. And we have seen companies implementing the whole concept of internal customers and external customers, right? So you need to enable the folks who are serving external customers with the help of support departments, right, who need to do. So, you know, when companies go enterprise-wide OKR implementation, we have seen absolutely these departments included too. But if they're doing step-by-step implementation, you know, initially starting with maybe one business unit, one department, and then they may be, you know, second and third in the line, right? That's what we have seen in practice.
Great. Yeah, and I would say too, Ethan, this is a complex one because this is a really tough one, because you could kind of get this weird thing where if OKRs are really important and certain functions aren't included, there's like, oh, do we not matter? Like it can create this sort of weird, and I don't know, like people feel excluded or something. At the same time, I really do subscribe to the less is more school of thought on OKRs. I generally find that people get into more trouble by having more complexity and more volume. I almost have never seen a company get in trouble by having too few, and I've seen a lot of companies get in trouble for having too many. So that would lead me to suggest, you know, really saying, does this function really need it, right? I mean, what you're talking about, these are support functions. And so I think OKRs are really helpful at the core objectives of the company, like sales and marketing and product, and really driven close, you know, revenue margin type stuff. So I think there's an argument to not, and to keep the OKR system a little more circumscribed. But then the other side, you do have the, you don't want people to feel left out. So if you're all in on OKRs and it's like in your culture, then you probably want to have it so that everyone feels included in it. But there is this other version of it. Maybe you do that after you have some success. But anyways, like Senthil was saying, it's a complex topic, and there's kind of reasons to go either way. Team, we're getting down to the last few minutes here. I really like this question from Ramandeep Senthil. He said, what is the role of the OKR champion? Is it mandatory to have an OKR champion if you're implementing OKRs for the first time? Who can be an OKR champion?
Yeah, sure. Let me answer that. So, we mentioned that there are multiple roles, right? Particularly if it is an enterprise-wide implementation, if you're having multiple departments which are involved. So there is an OKR chief who is like an OKR program owner who is responsible for the success of the OKR program, who's responsible for employee engagement, ensures that the trains run on time. But at the same time, as you take the OKR program across the enterprise, right, and you have hundreds of people, thousands of people practicing OKRs, you want to have departmental OKR champions. So their role is to ensure that people are actually participating in the OKR program enthusiastically, right? So at the simplest level, right, we want to see at least 80+% of people checking in on time, right? So the planning should get completed ideally by the first week of the quarter, and then every week when people check in, at least 80% or above, people should do on-time check-in. So the OKR champion's role is to really help achieve those sort of compliance metrics, right, for every phase of the OKR cycle. Plus, they also develop, a deep knowledge in the OKR program and as well as in the tool, and they become the go-to person within a particular department, when people have questions about OKRs. Yeah, hope that answers. And thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.